Luke Taylor to move the motion, when you're ready. Keep your voices down because they're taking the time of the next debate. Luke Taylor.
I beg to move that the House has considered knife crime in London. Thank you very much, Mr Efford. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship. Violence behaves like a virus. It spreads among a community and wreaks havoc not just on our streets but on our lives. And in London, that violence has a particularly virulent strain, knife crime. It was once famously said by a Prime Minister in waiting that real action in this area means being tough on crime and tough on the causes of crime. And yet, 3 decades on from those famous words, it has fallen out of political fashion to talk about violent crime as a social issue. As though sociologists and social workers on the ground are too misguided, too soft, even too woke to address the issue. But the notion that we have all been too soft on crime has a dangerous implication. That the surging knife crime on London streets can be punished away with tougher sentences and stronger deterrents. Absolutely.
I think the thing that comes to my mind, Mr Chairman, is that the upward trend is quite worrying, but at the same time there must be a zero tolerance policy, and that means if you leave the house with a knife in your pocket or in your coat, then a custodial sentence is necessary. Does the Honourable Gentleman perhaps not agree that that has to be part of the strategy?
Fully agree, and I think the community-based approaches, which I'll come on to later in speech, will talk about some of that, the recognition of that point. I intend to state the case today that there is a false premise, that successive governments have failed to do enough to invest in a whole-of-society approach to reducing knife crime, that young people are dying as a result, and that if we have any hope of getting a grip on the crisis, then we must get serious about a public health approach and the restoration of true old-fashioned community policing. The pillars of such an approach are threefold. Firstly, we must reinvigorate visible policing by restoring police budgets and get more beats, not just more bobbies. Secondly, we must rescue the early intervention space, protecting it from short-termism and ensuring it has the resource it needs. And thirdly, we must get serious about incorporating a public health approach with greater cohesion between civil society institutions and a willingness to try community and victim-led solutions like restorative justice. Let us start with restoring community policing. The data shows that the number of PCSOs in the Metropolitan Police Force declined from 4,247 in 2008 to a mere 1,215 in 2023. That failure, on the watch of consecutive mayors of both main parties, highlights the scale of the crisis. Because precisely at the time... yes, I will.
Thank you very much. And can I congratulate the Honourable Member on securing this debate on such an important topic. Everyone deserves to feel safe, and I think over the last 14 years we've seen police being decimated. In my constituency of Ilford South, we used to have, in the borough that encompasses Ilford South, 5 police stations, of which now there remains 1 for 4 constituencies. And what we've tried to do is bring engagement and enforcement hubs into the community. Would the Honourable Member agree with me that bringing police into the communities that they serve is a vital part in keeping our communities safe and, of course, restoring that pride in the police?
I couldn't agree more, and I was actually interested to hear your speech the other day about also including council enforcement officers in these hubs, and having them present in the community, accessible to residents is incredibly important. I'm keen to actually have a conversation with you after about those measures that you've achieved. Precisely at the time when we should be getting more police embedded in communities, exactly as the point's just been made, to halt knife crime, we've instead let numbers crater. We know that research consistently shows violent crime dropping significantly in areas where the police are present, visible and proactive. And yet, tragically, when a young man in my constituency, Ilya Habibi, had his life cut short by a knife at just 17 years of age in December 2023, he was just minutes away from a local police station. Just as worryingly, in my constituency and across London, we see safer neighbourhood officers being abstracted from their beats. This quirk of the setup of the Met Police means vital officers who should be on our streets making our neighbourhoods safer are being pulled away for major police operational events, typically in central London. It is in effect robbing outer London to pay inner London, and it has to stop. These officers want to be doing great work in the community, but the failure to recruit across the Met is letting them, and by extension us, down. And there can be no doubt that recruiting into the Met is challenging at the moment. The Casey report outlined far better than any of us can the scale of the failures that have taken place in recent years. Failures to get a grip on damaging internal cultures, failures to protect the victims of crime, and an overall failure to carry the confidence of the very communities that they serve. I've met with Commissioner Rowley, and I recognise his undertakings to reform the Met. And nobody in this place can pretend that his role is easy. But we surely must recognise that he needs the full backing of government to reinvigorate the force and repair its image. As yesterday's ruling on vetting clearance and dismissals shows, the hurdles in front of these reforms are immense. And the single greatest tool to smashing through those hurdles are the powers that the Secretary of State holds. So to bolster a new Met for London and drive knife crime down, it should be a priority of this government to expedite the reforms we all know the Met needs. Because without these reforms, how can we expect recruitment to bounce back? So I urge the Minister to outline today what steps the government are taking to get back to proper community policing, what steps they are taking to work with the Metropolitan Police to reduce abstraction rates, and what steps the government are taking to support Commissioner Rowley as he embarks on his package of reforms. But we cannot look to policing alone. The whole of society approach that is so desperately needed will require an it takes a village attitude, and as such requires a government committed to supporting early intervention initiatives. A key first step is diversionary programmes, which we know can cut knife crime out before it is allowed to metastasise across our streets. The Targeted Early Help and Integrated Support team at Sutton Borough Council do excellent work with young people across my constituency. Their approach is targeted. Once a potential young offender reprimanded by the police is brought to their attention, they work tirelessly to build positive relationships with the child to stop the otherwise steady and depressing downward spiral into criminality. It is so important to remember that these schemes offer opportunities to young people who are often not afforded the luxury of such attention elsewhere in their lives. In London, these intervention programmes rely heavily on grants from MOPAC, the Ministry of Justice and Violence Reduction Services. However, the youth services across London often face uncertainty about how and when these grants will be allocated. The team we spoke to on Sutton Council is still waiting for approval to see if their grant will be approved for March in only a few weeks' time. And these grants are typically only allocated for 18 months to 2-year periods, leaving little space for local authorities to plan ahead. All the evidence shows that young people susceptible to committing this form of violence require sustained relationships with skilled youth workers to help them choose safer paths. It is a relationship that can take months to form, but acts as a critical antidote to the peer pressure and social circumstances that are otherwise weighing down on the child. So it is utterly misguided to continue with this short-termism. Skilled youth workers are deterred from engaging in local authority work due to temporary contract conditions, and the lingering threat of grant termination could see the shattering of crucial relationships between London's youth workers and young people at risk of committing knife-related offences. Therefore, I'm keen to hear from the Minister if she will consider ring-fencing funding for local authority early intervention services in London, because without this multi-year funding to improve planning and put these services on a more stable footing, this vital first step in preventing knife crime will fall by the wayside. But backing early intervention is just one of the arrows in the quiver of a wider approach that we must shift to. because young people will continue to die if we do not take heed of our Scottish counterparts and finally embrace a public health approach. Famously, in Glasgow, it took thousands of knives off the streets and rallied organisations at every level to intervene before a crime is even committed. It is an approach that breaks down the silo walls between bodies, putting teachers, A&E doctors, social workers, sports clubs and so many more stakeholders in partnership with law enforcement. Absolutely.
You're making a really excellent speech, and he's identifying that there's no one solution here, and the Scotland example shows what can be done. But there are some practical measures that can be taken. For example, half of all homicides with sharp instruments are kitchen knives at the moment, and that simply hasn't been tackled. And that might be tackled, or at least the problem alleviated, by encouraging the transition to blunted knives rather than pointed knives. Is that something that he would support?
Thank you very much for the intervention. And blunted knives is a very good example of thinking differently about addressing the crimes, and quite often the tabloid approach of looking for popular, big, visible solutions like zombie knives, which are incredibly important, actually misses the statistics of how crimes are most often committed. So it's a very good point to raise. Thank you. The public health approach sees the problem of knife crime in 3 dimensions, and it recognises that violence begets violence like an illness. I return to my argument that violent crime is like a virus, and remind honourable members that when a contagious, dangerous virus broke out in this country half a decade ago, we rallied every aspect of civil society to fight it. Public services, the police and the third sector were all brought together to work as partners rather than in silos, because we implicitly recognise that this is the right way to tackle an emergency that threatens life and limb. So why do we fail so consistently to bring that approach to bear in dealing with knife crime in the capital? A hallmark of this approach is the creation of violence reduction units and their serious financial support by government to make them the hubs of proactive action they need to be. In London, we have done the first part, creating a violence reduction unit in 2018. But its potential remains woefully unrealised. And the Centre for Crime and Justice Studies tells me they fear it remains limited in its ability to engage with wider civil society, and is still entangled in the paradigm of enforcement rather than engagement. Funding for the VRUs like the one in London is just too low to make this strategy a reality, and it should surprise none of us that it therefore has not borne fruit. This is a wider problem because politicians of all stripes have paid lip service to the idea of a public health approach but have utterly failed to implement it. The last Conservative government, keen to be seen to do something, embraced the language of public health in crime reduction, but we have seen none of this effectively put into practice. Instead, they piloted controversial new powers that increased suspicionless stop and search, which evidently did little to stop knife crime, and the findings of which have yet to be brought before Parliament. It just isn't good enough. Not for mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters all over London whose lives are ripped apart by knife crime. They deserve a public health approach. We must join up public bodies, the police and the third sector so that young people are supported before they slip through the cracks. And we have to consider the principles of restorative practice too, because they underlie and echo everything that is good about the public health approach. Earlier this week, I met with Ray and Vi Donovan, who lost their son in a violent attack in 2001. In his memory, they created and have run for many years the award-winning Chris Donovan Trust, working with police, public bodies and charities across the board to highlight the value of restorative justice in preventing reoffending. They told me that their work takes the restorative principles not just into prisons, but schools. That approach, grounded in embedding empathy and victim awareness in young people, is like a light in the dark in London. It awakens in young people on the cusp of gang life, and even those already drowning silently in it, an awareness that carrying a knife will one day inevitably ruin their life and the lives of others. Restorative practice is too often overlooked, even as part of the wider package of public health reforms to crime. And it is vital to winning the war for the hearts and minds of young people at risk of picking up a knife. So, I'd ask the Minister to outline if they will consider putting victim awareness on the curriculum and encourage them to publish all the findings of the serious violence protection orders that were trialled by the last government, as well as detailed conclusions of the impact of suspicionless stop and search trials through the knife crime prevention orders. Surely, if these punitive and controversial methods worked, this information would have already been shared. But Parliament deserves to see that in writing so we can hasten the end of this troubled approach and speed up the saving of young lives through a better, public health-grounded approach. Because too many people are being failed before they even set foot into adulthood. And I think Londoners have had enough of senseless stabbing after senseless stabbing. But the truth at the heart of this crisis is that people carry knives because they fear becoming a victim themselves. And the only way to combat that climate of fear is with a public health approach that actually gets results. And as I reminded this House earlier this month, and do so again now, success in this area is measured in something more important than profit or efficiency. It is measured in lives saved, lives nourished, and lives reinvigorated. Thank you.
Before I read the question and call the Minister, I just need to remind the member in charge that he will not have the opportunity to wind up at the end, as is the convention with 30-minute debates. The question is that the House has considered knife crime in London. Minister.
Thank you, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning, Mr Efford. I'd like to start by thanking the Honourable Member for Sutton and Cheam for securing this very important debate. And I would also say that I think we both took part in a Westminster Hall debate a little while ago about knife crime in the West Midlands. And that also was a really important opportunity to shine a light on this very concerning problem. I just wanted to mention the other honourable members who've spoken as well. The Honourable Member for Strangford, who talked about zero tolerance. My honourable friend, the Member for Ilford South, who talked about how important it was to have the police in our communities, vital to keeping those communities safe. And my honourable friend, the Member for Hammersmith and Chiswick, who talked about the practical suggestions to address knife crime. And I have said before that I'm willing to look at any of the issues that might help us address knife crime. So I'm very happy to give way.
Her time. She's very generous in meeting the Safer Knives group to discuss this issue. I'm not expecting a policy position today, but perhaps she could say when the government would like to come forward with proposals in relation to the scourge of knife crime that's affecting us.
I think it's fair to say that we are looking constantly at what more we can do. So although I can't give a timetable for that, perhaps I could reassure my honourable friend by saying it is under active consideration at the moment, and we are keen to look at evidence and to consider what more we might be able to do on the particular point I know he is interested in. I think the honourable member who secured the debate, his contribution powerfully illustrated the depth of concern that there is around knife crime, and I am again very grateful for this opportunity to set out the government's approach to tackling knife crime. And it's important to say that this is a whole of government approach and fits very well within our Safer Streets mission and our very clear objective, which is to halve knife crime over the course of the next 10 years. But I think before I go on to talk a little bit more about those particular policies we will adopt, I want to just remind all honourable members that we must keep at the forefront of our minds the people who are directly affected by this dangerous and, in the worst cases, deadly threat, the victims of knife crime and their loved ones. And they must all be in our thoughts and prayers today and always. And I was really interested to hear of the excellent work of the Chris Donovan Trust, and that I really would like to find out more about that and perhaps meet the Trust to see what more I can do to support them. So, as I've said, first and foremost, this has to be about keeping people safe. It's about ensuring that more families do not go through the agony of that, for example, empty chair at the dining table. Because the tragic truth is that knife crime does destroy lives, and too often the young lives with futures that should have been filled with hope and potential are just lost. And that is why we described this as a national crisis in our manifesto, and it's why we have set ourselves the aim, as I've said, of halving knife crime in a decade as part of the Safer Streets mission. I want to just talk a little bit about the Coalition to Tackle Knife Crime, just to set this in context. The Prime Minister launched the Coalition to Tackle Knife Crime in September, bringing together campaign groups, families of those who've tragically lost their lives to knife crime, young people who've been impacted, and community leaders, united in their mission to save lives. And we are very pleased that there is representation from London on the coalition. And the coalition will work with the government to help us identify the children and young people at risk of being affected by knife crime, help us design the policy changes and reforms that are based on the best possible evidence, and most importantly, tackle the root causes of knife crime. And I hear what the Honourable Gentleman said about education and how important that is. And in fact, I've recently written to the Secretary of State for Education about the review that was taking place on the curriculum and around relationship and sex education to ensure that knife crime and what it means can be part of that review. And I also just wanted to say to the Honourable Gentleman, because to be frank, half an hour isn't long enough for this debate, that I will take away a number of the asks that he's made today, and I will come back to him with information and a way forward. Neighbourhood policing has been talked about, and it's absolutely essential when it comes to tackling this most dangerous of threats that we have the resources going into our neighbourhood policing. And few things matter more, actually, than that presence, as my honourable friend referred to in Ilford South, of having that community policing. And that's why the restoration of neighbourhood policing is at the heart of our plans to reform policing, and why we've committed to delivering an additional 13,000 police officers, PCSOs and specials in neighbourhood policing roles. And the Honourable Gentleman will know, as part of the police settlement, we've doubled the amount of money going into neighbourhood policing for next year, up to £200 million to kickstart that neighbourhood policing guarantee. And that will apply to the Metropolitan Police as well. And I heard very loud and clear his concerns about abstraction. But the neighbourhood policing guarantee is about those additional officers who will be in neighbourhoods who will not be abstracted. There will be a named police officer that the community can reach out to. So also, just while we're reflecting on the Metropolitan Police, I absolutely agree with the Honourable Gentleman. They are facing some very big challenges. I think it's important to note progress has been made on the new Met for London plan. Just in recent weeks, the Met came out of the engage process with the inspectorate, the police inspectorate. So progress is being made. And as a minister, I'm certainly having regular meetings with the Metropolitan Police Commissioner and other officers as well to make sure that the Home Office is providing all that we can to support Sir Mark in his work. And I heard Sir Mark this morning on the radio talking about the judicial review case yesterday. And I can assure the honourable member that work is ongoing to deal with the particular issue that he was talking about this morning about. I think we all agree we want to have police officers in the Met and in every police force that are able to do their job effectively, that are properly vetted, and that anyone who cannot hold vetting as a police officer should not be in the police force. So please rest assured that work is ongoing. I want to talk a little bit about Young Futures, which is also something the government is putting forward as part of the solution to knife crime. We know that too many children and young people today are facing poorer life outcomes, including becoming involved in knife crime, because they are not effectively identified and supported early enough, that early intervention. So to address this issue, we have committed to the creation of the Young Futures programme, which will establish a network of Young Futures hubs and Young Futures prevention partnerships to intervene earlier to ensure that this cohort is identified and offered support, as well as creating more opportunities to young people in their communities through the provision of open access, for example, to mental health and careers and mentoring support. Young Futures Hubs will bring together the support services that tackle the underlying needs of vulnerable children and young people, making them more accessible to those that need them. And these hubs will promote children and young people's development, improve their mental health and well-being, and prevent them from being drawn into crime. As for the Young Futures Prevention Partnerships, they will bring together key partners in local areas across England and Wales to identify vulnerable children and young people at risk of being drawn into crime, map local youth service provision, and offer support in a more systematic way to divert them. And I also note the Honourable Member's comments about funding and about securing that funding for the long term, so I will reflect on those comments. I also just want to mention violence reduction units, because one of the issues that we face, especially in the prevention sphere, is the number of agencies that are often involved. And by bringing together partners and mobilising them behind the same goals at that local level, the violence reduction units, I think, perform a really important role. In response to the drivers around violence and knife crime, they have been delivering a range of early intervention and prevention programmes to support young people away from a life of crime. And this includes activity across all 32 boroughs through the London Crime Prevention Fund, enabling the local adoption of a public health approach and borough-level violence reduction interventions. Their programmes span from police custody to the community, some of which members might have seen featured in Idris Elba's recent knife crime documentary for the BBC. And this also includes the excellent work underway at the Royal London Hospital, which I had the great privilege of visiting yesterday. I met there the dedicated team of youth workers who provide support to young people at a critical, teachable moment when they are admitted for violent injuries and provided positive routes out. I also just wanted to say that the confirmed police funding settlement for next year includes over £49 million for the continuation of this work to prevent that serious violence delivered through the violence reduction units. And in London, that amounts to £9.4 million that was announced yesterday. Another commitment that the Labour government has made is around youth offending team referrals for young knife carriers. So we're working really closely with the Ministry of Justice to deliver that manifesto commitment to ensure that every young person found in possession of a knife is referred to a youth offending team with mandatory plans in place. And that can include electronic monitoring and custody where appropriate to prevent reoffending. The Honourable Gentleman also referred to stop and search. And I would say to him that I think stop and search is an important tool. I'm very well aware of issues around different communities being searched in different ways. But it can be used in an intelligence-led way, and it can be very fair and effective if it's used in that way. And I think it's worth reflecting on the 12 months to March 2024, stop and search led to 4,048 offensive weapons and firearms being found by the police through stop and search in London. So it has its place, I think, in the arsenal for the police to be able to access. I think I also just wanted to refer to the fact that we've already started to deal with some of the other issues around knives. For example, we've implemented the ban on zombie knives and zombie-style machetes. That ban came into force on the 24th of September. We've had the consultation on banning ninja swords, and we're bringing that forward, and we hope to do that shortly. We've had Commander Stephen Clayman at the National Police Chiefs Council leading a review of online sales, and of course the Home Secretary has announced in the last few weeks that the government intends to strengthen age verification controls and checks for all online sellers of knives at the point of purchase and on delivery. And we've also consulted on introducing personal liability measures on senior executives of online platforms or marketplaces who fail to take action to remove illegal content relating to knives and offensive weapons. So I think, in conclusion, I want to once again thank the Honourable Gentleman for securing this important debate. I think we're all seeking the same outcomes, which are a reduction in knife crime and safer streets, And I think these objectives are very central to the government's plan for change, and we will do everything in our power to achieve them.
Order. The sitting is suspended until 2:30. Well done, everyone.